Hey everyone, before we get into things, I just want to take a second to say thank you for being very patient with the release of this video. November and the end of October was a very busy time for me with a lot going on, and honestly, I just got burned out. And I really love IBO, I really love this show, and I didn't want the video on it to be rushed, so I just decided it would come out when it came out and to take my time. That's the reason. That's pretty much it. Because of that, you will see some costuming changes during the course of this video. It was filmed over 3 weeks, so it's just going to happen. Also, for about half the video, I look like fucking Gendo Ikari with the glasses glare, so that does get fixed eventually. Apologize for that, but I was not going to reshoot half the video. So, anyway, thank you all for being very patient, and enjoy the video. Oh yeah, also in a minute I'm gonna say that I started watching IBO in 2013 weekly. That's a fucking mistake. It was 2015. I got it messed up with the release date of Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods. So why didn't I just edit this in or reshoot that particular sentence? I don't know. Hey there, and welcome back to the channel. I've mentioned a few times in past content that I went through a period in my life that was basically an anime drought. As a kid, I loved stuff like DBZ, G Gundam, and Yu Yu Hakusho, but in my late teens and early 20s, I really wasn't exposed to much of the medium. This animation hiatus waned back in 2013 when the first season of Attack on Titan was being talked about by literally everyone with a pulse. People I knew who hadn't seen an anime since Pokemon were watching and loving AOT, and that show sort of opened a doorway for anime to come back into my life as a pretty big portion of my entertainment. Right around the same time that Attack on Titan released was also the return of a beloved childhood show of mine in the form of Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods. That 2013 film would lead to an anime sequel in Dragon Ball Super, and the reason that all of this is important is because there are two anime that I watched weekly as they released in 2013. One was Dragon Ball Super, and the other was Gundam Blooded Orphans. Much like G Gundam was an important piece of media to me while I was growing up, Gundam IBO was one of the first anime that I watched as it was releasing. I even talked about it online on Reddit on a per episode basis. And this was 2015 Reddit, so the narwhal was definitely baconing at midnight. Mostly, I remember there being a real excitement for the series at the time. Sure, there were elements that were divisive. I saw more than one person hating on the main Gundam's design because of its slender waistline, but a lot of people were happy to have another big Gundam show finally airing. At this point, 00 was the most recent thing that Western audiences would have easy access to because Age and Reconquista in G hadn't aired in America by that point. So with all that being said, I just want to note that I am very biased in favor of IBO being a great show. Just being honest. This video will cover the first season of Blooded Orphans, so let's sit back and take a look at the story of Tekkadan. Blooded Orphans takes place in an unfortunately bleak but also quite believable future. Known as the post-disaster timeline, IBO's characters inhabit a solar system that was ravaged by a near-apocalyptic event known as the Calamity War. 300 years after a military organization known as Gallarhorn put a stop to the Calamity War with their 72 Gundam frame mobile suits, they now rule over a solar system that still bears the scars of that conflict. Dissent is quietly brewing in the colonies around the moon, and the outer spheres are a loosely controlled frontier run by corrupt Gallarhorn officials and business conglomerates that operate more closely to Yakuza and organized crime families than by-the-numbers corporations. While the colonies are feeling rumblings of civil disobedience led by labor unions for unfair treatment and wealth disparity, the people of Mars are beginning to cling to a full-on independence movement spurred on by massive poverty, basically no civil rights, and having their valuable resources sent back to Earth. Unbeknownst to them, a small paramilitary company called Crise Guard Security, or CGS for short, is about to take center stage in the fight against the crushing status quo. Among the different regiments of CGS is one composed of child soldiers ranging from 17 to younger than 10. These boys are shown no compassion from the owner or soldiers of CGS, and are subjected to regular beatings and other forms of abuse. Among the ranks of CGS 3rd Group are Season 1's main protagonists. Well, I'd argue there are actually 3 main protagonists, but whatever. The head of 3rd Group is Orga Itsuka, a lilac-haired 17-year-old with the tendency to take responsibility for his men as a protective leader. Orga's closest friend within the group is Mikazuki August, the quiet, sometimes awkward, and sometimes menacing right-hand man. Orga and Mika are the closest of brothers, and Season 1 will go to great lengths time and time again to show just how close their bond really is. The cold open of Season 1 shows how they've been together since they were children, sticking together through the most dire of circumstances, like shooting a guy in a dirty alley. Yeah, that's one way to make an impression on an audience. Open the first episode with 2 children killing a guy in cold blood and not even caring about it. CGS is hired by a young woman named Kudelia Ina Bernstein to transport her from Mars to Earth. At first, this seems like a pretty easy everyday job, so the company president, a money-grubbing man named Maruba RK, assigns CGS 3rd Group to be her personal escort. We get to see how the 3rd is treated as little more than slaves, as a young member named Takaki is whipped in the face for slacking off while performing manual labor. Their abuse is so commonplace that he's just used to it too. They really want to cement in the viewer's mind how the young members of this company are treated like dirt. Nearby, Mika tests out a weapon-equipped mobile worker, a small tank-like vehicle crewed by a single pilot. Mika may as well be the ace of the 3rd Group, and has undergone an incredibly dangerous surgery to install something called the Alea Visionana system into his own body. This incredibly invasive surgery dates back to the Calamity War, and is said to be easiest to perform on children. Yikes. It allows a pilot to connect directly with a mobile worker or mobile suit, giving them increased spatial awareness and reaction speed. While most of the kids that work for Tekkadan have undergone this surgery to be more useful to the company, Mikazuki has undergone it 3 separate times. Kudelia arrives at the base and is determined to see how the common people of Mars truly live, so she asks Mika to show her around. Kudelia is very forthright and honest, wanting to shake the young soldier's hand and then getting embarrassed when it comes off as super patronizing. Of course, this easy-looking job is not what it seems. Up in orbit, Kudelia's father, Norman Bernstein, who is an important Earth representative, sells out his daughter's location to a Gjallarhorn major named Coral Conrad. Yeah, Kudelia's father is a real scumbag politician, and also he's naive, as he thinks he can talk Coral into going easy on her. I guess that's why Coral only sends 3 mobile suits after her instead of just like an orbital strike. That would be an unsatisfying ending, I guess. That night, Gjallarhorn snipers infiltrate the perimeter and take out some of the guards. An alarm is immediately raised, which blows the cover for the mobile suit unit made up of Gjallarhorn soldiers, Orlis, Crank, and Ein. To illustrate how much Gjallarhorn wants custody of Kudelia, not only are they sending in snipers and mobile suit squads, they also start shelling the base with artillery and send in their own armor as well. While Mika and another soldier named Akihiro defend the base with their squads of mobile workers, Orga comes up with a plan, and the cowardly Maruba is seen raiding his safe. Orga even tries to ask Maruba what the plan is, but when he's told that the 3rd is to attack the enemy directly so that the other groups can perform a pincer attack, he knows that he's being used as a diversion so that the adults can escape. Too bad for the fleeing soldiers that Orga had the bright idea of rigging up their vehicles with signal flares, and when those flares go off, Gjallarhorn pulls some pressure off the base to chase the fleeing soldiers. Finally, Orlis commands his mobile suits to enter the battle, and they pretty much effortlessly destroy the mobile workers. The situation becomes incredibly bleak, and Orga himself is about to be smashed by a 2-story tall axe when some of the best music in the entire franchise starts playing, and Mecha comes to the rescue in the barely functional Gundam Barbatos. CGS had this thing just sitting in a warehouse to be sold off at some point, but the head mechanic, Mr. Takinojo, was able to get it started, and good thing he did, because between Mika's piloting skills and Barbatos's raw power, he's able to fight off all 3 Gjallarhorn mobile suits. One of my absolute favorite things about Blooded Orphans is that the combat in this show is incredibly weighty and visceral. Beam weapons are super rare, leaving most long-range engagements to be fought with missiles and other ballistic weapons. Along with the mech-sized machine guns and long rifles, the mobile suits also tend to carry melee weapons as well, and if you guys watched my Breakblade video from the beginning of this year, you'll know that I love mechs with big chunky metal weapons. Axes, swords, and giant maces are commonplace in this season, along with some other more unique weapons like the katana and giant crushing scissors. Engagements in this show are long and arduous wars of attrition, and even grunt suits like the Gjallarhorn Greys can stand a good amount of punishment before going down. There's no one-shot, one-kill beam rifles here. With Orlis dead, Lieutenant Crank and his subordinate Ein return to orbit, mostly to be screamed at by Coral, who has an internal investigation looming in the near future. Crank is the honor-bound type of character who is absolutely disgusted that he was ordered to engage child soldiers in combat. So when he's ordered to head back down to Mars and finish the job to abduct Kudelia, he takes it upon himself to go alone. Crank tells Ein not to follow him. He will not allow a soldier under his command to besmirch their honor by fighting children, so he'll shelter Ein by going alone. Back down on Mars, the Third are grieving their 42 deceased members, and Orga comes up with an idea to change their fate. When the remnants of 1st Division return without President Maruba, Orga has their food drugged and has them tied up in a storage room. When they wake up, Orga has Mika shoot the First's leader and one other guy that tries to resist, and he tells them that he's in charge now. Orga isn't a cruel person though, and besides the 2 people that were just executed, he allows anyone who wants to leave the ability to leave with some severance pay and their lives. Well, except for a guy named Dexter, because he's an accountant and they basically need him to run the company. You might think that the best plan would be for everyone to just run away with nobody that could stop them, but there's really nowhere on Mars for them to go. Working for CGS might be awful work, one step above slavery, but for a lot of the kids in the Third, it's the only thing that keeps them from starving in the street. But Orga wants to provide a life for all of the people that stick by him, so his plan is to take over the operation from Maruba and continue as a legitimate business. As the group's first job, Orga decides that they could take on Kudelia's escort mission, but they have an issue of startup costs. Another thing that IBO does that I really enjoy is that it hashes out all these conversations on screen. The inner workings of the company are laid out through pretty complex dialogue between the characters that often reference other characters and events. This is a show that does not waste any character interaction. Pretty much every line is important, and honestly I think that I didn't even catch a lot of it my first time through. Along with the aforementioned members of CGS Third Group, we also have a pretty big cast of supporting characters. We have Orga's inner circle that includes Mika, though most of the time it's shown that Mika doesn't attend meetings because he has total trust in Orga's decisions. Eugene is the blonde-haired youth who is the unofficial first mate. Beyond being the one who's most likely to speak up with his own ideas, Eugene is also the most likely to question Orga's orders over the course of Season 1. That's an important trait for someone that considers themselves second in command, as it constantly pushes Orga to actually think about his decisions and the situation. There's Shino, who's the often loud and cheerful one of the bunch, and is probably the most eccentric among the group too. though he gets a lot more character development later and goes from leading troops to wanting to become a pilot for reasons we'll go into later. Biscuit, the big-boned heart of the group who's always there to support Orga, even if that means sometimes questioning his decisions. Biscuit is the heart and soul of the group, and he must be protected at all costs. Also, Biscuit has two sisters that live nearby on a farm, and yes, they are named Cookie and Cracker. You should meet his cousin Ritz, she's quite a looker. As Orga's inner circle is trying to figure out what to do, an alarm blares and Lieutenant Crank approaches the base bearing a flag on his mobile suit that signals that he wants to duel. Crank says that if he wins the duel, he'll simply take Kudelia and leave, and while Kudelia says that she'll go of her own free will to protect the members of CGS, Orga asks Mika if he'd be willing to fight. Orga doesn't think he can trust Crank's word, so Mika goes out in Barbatos, and while the duel commences, the way that Mika fights inspires Kudelia. She has a moment earlier where she asks about getting the AV surgery that was basically laughed off, but now she's inspired and sees that a different type of battlefield awaits her. Mika wins the duel by smashing Crank's cockpit with the ejecting tip on his giant mace, and Orga comes up with a new name for the CGS. He knew that he would have to throw off the shackles of the old name for everyone to live freely, and so he names the company Tekkadan, the iron flower that never wilts. Mika ends the duel by shooting Crank with his sidearm, and now everyone else begins to freak out, wondering what they'll do if Gjallarhorn definitely decides to come after them. Kudelia announces that she wants them to continue the job of escorting her to Earth, and while she no longer trusts her father and won't get the money from him, she has another patron named Nobliss Gordon that can fund them. And you could say that Kudelia is a bit naive for trusting Nobliss, but come on, who's more trustworthy than a fat old naked man in a sauna? But alternative motivations or not, Nobliss does agree to bankroll Kudelia's trip to Earth. Now Tekkadan has to figure out how they're going to get there. CGS owns a battleship called the Will-o'-the-Wisp, and once they do some legal paperwork, it will be transferred to Tekkadan. But the biggest problem is that Gjallarhorn owns most of the space shipping lanes to Earth. Now, it seems kind of silly to say there are lanes in space. I mean, you would think you just point your ship towards Earth and get started, but in the post-disaster timeline of Gundam IBO, communication and space travel are often made quite difficult because of AHAB reactors. AHAB reactors are pre-Calamity War technology that output a near-infinite supply of energy through the use of an essentially magic particle called the AHAB particle. These reactors are used in starships, space colonies, mobile suits, and other stellar constructs for propulsion, artificial gravity creation, and many other uses. The major downside with AHAB reactors is that it causes interference with radio waves and other types of power production. It's basically this series' stand-in for the Minovsky particle, which is in the UC. In order to make space travel possible, Gjallarhorn created and dispersed a ton of transmitter stations throughout the solar system's Lagrange points to form what is known as the Ariadne network. I am going to say that word wrong. This network is encrypted, so you can use it for secure communication, and you can also use the network for navigation. So getting from Mars to Earth safely requires picking a route that jumps from several of these stations. The problem for Tekkadan is that they'll need a guide in order to find their way to Earth. But one of the adult members who stayed behind, a guy with a little Hitler mustache named Toto, says he knows the CEO of the Orcus Corporation and can get them a ride. Now, trusting this little pot-bellied schemer is a bad idea, and that has been made painfully obvious to the audience because he keeps smiling to himself and mumbling, "These rotten space rats are gonna pay," under his breath almost every time he's on screen. But Orga doesn't know that, so when Toto can set up a guide for a cool 45% cut of the total payout, Tekkadan takes the bait. Mikazuki sees that Kudelia is pretty stressed, so he, Atra, and Biscuit take her to Biscuit's grandmother's nearby farm. It's here that they explain to Kudelia that despite growing a huge harvest that could fetch a pretty penny as food, all this corn is bought by companies and the government to be turned into biofuel. The pay isn't good enough to keep them fed, and without Biscuit's CGS pay, the farm would have shut down long ago. Again, we see how sheltered Kudelia is to the way that people actually live. Despite wanting to help, she's never had the opportunity to see how desperate the common people are with her own two eyes. While they're there, Cookie and Cracker almost get run over by two dapper gentlemen. Then Mika sees this and has a little freak out moment where he goes to choke one of them out until he's told by Grandma Sakura to mind his manners. These two are Gailio Bowdween and McGillis Farid, special inspectors from Gallarhorn and members of the Seven Stars, the most powerful ruling families of the military hierarchy. They're on Mars because they're the ones carrying out the investigation on Coral. McGillis is pretty good at his job, so when he finds an entire squad of mobile suits is missing, he doesn't believe that Coral dispatched them to quell unrest in the Martian city. Hearing rumors that there was a battle in this area recently, they go out to scout the landscape, only to almost run over Biscuit's sisters. It's also here that we get Gailio's very visceral reaction to Mika's AV system. Most of the Tekkadan members have them, but now we're learning that people from the Earth sphere and upper society think body modifications are disgusting, a notion that is left over from the Calamity War. Yeah, it literally makes Gailio vomit. Biscuit successfully talks his way out of the conversation with McGillis by saying that there's a paramilitary company nearby and he thought that they were just firing weapons. Of course, this kinda adds fuel to the fire because then McGillis looks into CGS and sees that they've changed their name to Tekkadan, which is kind of incredibly sus. Oh, and also this scene is where McGillis gets the nickname Chocolate Man because he gives Cookie and Cracker some candy, and trust me, that is a nickname that sticks around for a long time. Tekkadan finally leaves the Red Planet, but it's not long before Mr. Orcus betrays them to Coral. While the shuttle is trying to get to the newly named Isaribi, Gjallarhorn mobile suits show up and demand that they hand over Kudelia. While Toto says he doesn't know anything about Gjallarhorn, Eugene and the others beat the shit out of him anyway. What Gjallarhorn doesn't know is that the Gundam Barbatos was laying in wait inside the shuttle's cargo bay, and Mika wastes no time fighting off the enemy's grazes. McGillis decides to join the battle in his Graze custom. Then he scans the Barbatos and sees that its Ahab reactor signature is registered to a Gundam frame. Oh yeah, also Coral does not last long in this fight, as once Orga and the others make it to the Isaribi, Akihiro takes the captured Graze and enters the battle, and brings Mika his giant mace, which turns the tides even more. There's a really great scene where Orga slingshots the Isaribi around an asteroid by firing an anchor at it, and then having Eugene and a mobile worker blow the anchor off. The tricky maneuver works, and everyone is successfully recovered by the speeding Isaribi as it flies directly past Orcus' ship and away from Mars. Now that they're flying blind without a guide ship, Orga says that they should contact Tewaz to see if they can work out a deal. Tewaz is a huge company based out of the outer spheres with enough clout that Gjallarhorn can't just openly attack them. The big problem is that Tewaz is basically the space Yakuza and Italian Mafia all rolled into one, and Tekkadan has pretty much nothing to bargain with. While they mull over what to do, we get a couple of really good conversations that really lay out some of the world building and Kudelia's in-depth reason for wanting to go to Earth. Kudelia has been talking to a man named Toganosuke Makanai, the Prime Minister of the Arbrow Economic Bloc, about the unfair treatment of the people in the Crise region of Mars. Kudelia is fighting for the deregulation of Martian resources, namely the half-metals that are mined out of the planet, and that would allow citizens of Mars to actually benefit from the mining operations that is stripping their planet. Also, Kudelia learns that a lot of the kids on the Tekkadan crew don't even know how to read, and the thought that they have had these surgeries forced upon them but aren't even given schooling is really dark. I haven't talked about her yet, but Kudelia has this attendant that she takes everywhere with her named Fumitan Admos. Fumitan doesn't have too much going on in the early episodes of the show, but she does have that librarian/maid energy that I personally appreciate. She is asked to fill the role of comms officer on the Isaribi because she's able to just sorta hack into the Gjallarhorn Ariadne network right from the console? That isn't suspicious at all. Finally, the Isaribi gets a call from an incredibly pissed off Maruba, who demands that he return their ship and is in the company of an incredibly dapper man in a white suit and hat named Naze Turbine. Naze is the head of the Turbines, the company in charge of Teiwaz's transportation division. So, even though his crew is small, Naze is an important man with a direct connection to the head of Teiwaz, McMurdo Barristan. Beyond being a big shot in this sector of space, Naze is also one of my favorite characters. He's fashionable and cool-headed, plus he flies around in his flagship, the Hammerhead, with his literal harem of wives because he's just that much of a Chad. Later on, we learn that all the women aboard the Turbine ship come from tough situations, or backgrounds not unlike the guys of Tekkadan, and have made their home with Naze, something that Orga tries to emulate for his men. Except the harem part of that, Naze does have a ton of wives. I honestly don't know how he has the time. But for now, Orga and the rest of Tekkadan are basically staring down the Hammerhead's main gun. And while Naze ignores Maruba's calls for revenge and offers to work with Tekkadan if they just hand over the ship in Kudelia, Orga comes up with a different plan. While Mika and Akihiro fight off mobile suits from the Turbine ship, Orga has the Isaribi fire missiles that are filled with smoke, and then he uses this as a diversion to ram the Hammerhead with the Isaribi's armored nose. Tekkadan's ship turns away at the last possible second, but Naze's sigh of relief is short-lived as he realizes that Orga is personally leading a boarding party all the way to his bridge. Orga used the moment the ships pass to transfer his men to the Hammerhead in a daring maneuver that impresses Naze, and when Orga arrives at the bridge, Naze calls off his mobile suit's assault. Which is really good timing because the Turbine's pilots, Amida, Ozzy, and Laughter were no pushovers and have given Mika and Akihiro the hardest fight of the series so far. We also got some really cool technical bits where the mobile suits were launching in this episode, and the new designs that were introduced were really fun. This is where Akihiro starts to come into his own as a character as well, as he seems really pleased with his progress as a mobile suit pilot. It's no wonder that he would go on to become a fan favorite character, and I'm going to get into his whole backstory and situation momentarily, but for now, Mika and Akihiro have really been the MVPs of Tekkadan's offensive capabilities. Because Naze is so impressed with Orga's gutsy tactics, he says he'll consider Tekkadan's counter-offer to work with the Turbines instead of Maruba. He does stop the enraged Orga from blowing Maruba's head off right there on the bridge though, and then you don't really see the old guy again until way later, so I guess they threw him in the brig. Orga asks Naze to make Tekkadan a subsidiary of Teiwaz, willing to trade their total freedom for the stability and protection of a Corpo patron, and the use of their trade lanes to Earth. Naze says that only the head of Teiwaz can make that decision, but he'll take them to a space station called Saisei to introduce them. On the way, we get a couple of conversations about the economic blocks of Earth and how they feel that they're being oppressed by Gjallarhorn. Naze says that Kudelia meeting with the leader of Arbrow could shake the foundations of Gjallarhorn's power. An economic bloc willingly considering rescinding its colonial rule over a portion of Mars and meeting with a figurehead of the Red Planet's independence movement is a big deal. Over everything else, Gjallarhorn is an organization that is dedicated to stability, and they have kept the status quo for 300 years since the Calamity War. Orga gets a message from the members of Tekkadan that stayed at the base back on Mars, and they tell him the leftover CGS money is almost gone, so that puts even more pressure on him to succeed. Luckily for Orga, Naze is there to take him under his wing and hand out advice man to man. You get the feeling that Naze might see a little of his younger self in Orga. He definitely calls Orga out for running Tekkadan like a family instead of a business, but that is literally what Naze does, so it's less of a criticism and more of a way to get Orga to realize how much he cares about everyone. I think it's also really sweet that Orga gets this older male mentor figure in the form of Naze, because that's something that he's literally never had throughout his entire life. And while Naze isn't really a father figure, he's a pretty good older brother, and Orga begins to value his advice relatively quickly. Tekkadan and the Turbines arrive at Saisei Station, and Orga is taken to meet Barristan McMurdo right away. Of course, the leader of Teiwaz is wearing classic Japanese-style Yakuza garb, but he's also eating cannolis, so the future is a melting pot. Orga is surprised when Naze says he wants to swear a Sakazuki blood oath to him, but McMurdo says that it's fine. Tekkadan will be brought into the Teiwaz fold and be brothers with the Turbines. While they wait for the Sakazuki ceremony, Orga decides that they need to blow off some steam, so he lets some of the older guys go drinking on the station. Orga overdoes it a little bit and throws up, meeting a woman in very sensible shoes who gives him a handkerchief. Little does he know it, this woman is named Maribit, and she will soon be assigned to the Isaribi as a sort of Teiwaz chaperone. This is where we start to become a little suspicious of Fumitan, as she looks at this matching BFF necklace that Kudelia bought her and types a message in secret on the computer. I will admit that Fumitan sneaking around the background is a lot more obvious on a rewatch, but even the first time through, this comes off as pretty sneaky. Tekkadan and the Turbines attend the Blood Oath ceremony, where they get to wear these formal robes, and Orga admits that his personal pride no longer really matters to him. He wants only to protect his brothers and Tekkadan. From here on out, the members of Tekkadan are bonded as a family. Even Akihiro calls himself part of the family, which is a big step for him. Akihiro has one of the more tragic backstories in the whole of IBO, and it mostly comes down to the fact that he's something known in the IBO world as human debris. Human debris are little more than slaves in the outer spheres. Mostly wayward, orphaned children and kidnapping victims of some pirate group or one of the many criminal syndicates out in space. Human debris are not seen as people at all, have no rights, and are treated as property by their owners. When Tekkadan was still the CGS under the thumb of Maruba, Akihiro and a few of the others, namely Chad and Dante, were employed as human debris. The red stripe on their uniform jackets signifies their station as human debris, and even after Orga took over the organization and gave Akihiro the human debris contracts to him and all of his men, thereby freeing them, he decided to stay on with the company. So seeing Akihiro, of all people, be excited about Tekkadan being a family is honestly really nice. It really shows how much this sentiment means to a lot of the members of Tekkadan. Mika and Yukinojo stay at Saisei so Teiwaz's head engineer can tune up Barbatos, but the Isaribi and Hammerhead begin their journey to Earth. Naze explains that they're using the lanes towards Earth that have less of a Galahorn presence, but they run the danger of being attacked by pirates. Akihiro and Takaki head out on patrol, and we get a little background info on Takaki and how he pays for his sister's orphanage fees with his Tekkadan pay. Akihiro confides in him that he used to have a younger brother named Masahiro. As kids, they traveled with their parents, who were a pair of modestly successful merchants, until they were attacked by pirates, and the brothers were separated. Almost as if by fate, Takaki and Akihiro are attacked by pirate mobile suits, and are almost killed when Mika shows up in the newly improved Gundam Barbatos. The pirates are no match for Mika and his badass katana. That is until Kudal shows up with his chunky Gusion. The Gusion's armor is way too thick for Mika to penetrate with the Barbatos' rifle. Ozzy and Laughter show up from the Hammerhead, and the superior numbers causes Kudal to retreat, but not before Takaki is almost crushed in the cockpit of the mobile worker he was in, and we get the reveal that one of the pirates is Akihiro's brother. Wow, small world. Luckily for Takaki, the Isaribi has a med bay with a recovery bed in it, which is pretty much like a Bacta tank from Star Wars. Maribit has to take over as a nurse because Tekkadan has no ship's doctor, which is something that she gives Orga an earful about, and thus begins the dynamic between Orga and Maribit, where he always feels that she looks down on them for being young, and it makes Orga feel like Teiwaz doesn't fully trust him and has put a chaperone on his ship. A man named Brooks contacts Orga and Naze and tells them that he is the leader of the Brewers, a powerful pirate group that has been hired to capture Kudelia. Naze says he has no idea how anyone would have found out that Kudelia was with them, so there must be some sort of conspiracy behind the scenes. Gestures wildly at Fumitan, sending secret messages from the comms console. While Tekkadan has no real options other than sitting around and waiting to see if the Brewers attack again, we get to catch back up with Gallarhorn Specialist Majors McGillis and Gaelio reporting to McGillis's father, Lord Isnario Farid. Gallarhorn has a collective of great families that rule its ranks that are collectively known as the Seven Stars. McGillis has actually been adopted into one of these families, and as luck would have it, he's about to be part of another one of the Seven Stars as well. McGillis is revealed to be engaged to Gaelio's sister Almeria, with the kicker being that Almeria is only 9 years old. And yes, McGillis offering 2 children chocolate after nearly running them over on Mars and being engaged to a 9-year-old really did put him in the crosshairs for 2015 era pedo jokes and memes, and yeah, they were pretty funny. However, the marriage between McGillis and Almeria is intended to show how, for all its pomp and self-importance, Gallarhorn still falls prey to the things that those who have power always do. McGillis begins talking about how he wants to end the corruption that he sees within Gallarhorn, and at first you think he's just really dedicated to his job as a special inspector, but it goes beyond that. He has a desire to reform the organization as a whole and recreate it as an ideal Gallarhorn. Arranged marriages and corrupt fleet officers are just the outer layer of Gallarhorn's problems in McGillis's eyes, and he wants to expose that hypocrisy and make it right, but not before taking a much-needed vacation on Earth, leaving Gaelio to clean up and finish up the paperwork from the mission on Mars, I assume. Oh yeah, also we get a scene where we see Ein, who is now working directly for Gaelio because Gaelio likes the cut of his jib, and he's yelled at and threatened by some Earth Fleet soldiers. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're a by-the-book soldier who's dedicated his life to the cause, Ein's mother was from Mars, so they see him as someone with dirty blood. Just seeing how openly xenophobic they are towards him right after McGillis's talk about changing Gallarhorn really makes you want to root for the guy. After all, both our main groups of protagonists in Tekkadan and antagonists in Gallarhorn want to fight for change. There's a lot of shades of gray to this story. Back on board the Isaribi, Akihiro has gone into a sort of melancholic spiral. He believes that Takaki being wounded in battle is his fault due to his brother being one of the pirates. Akihiro is also struggling with the fact that while he's been enjoying life advancing the goals of Tekkadan, his brother has been left to suffer as human debris. Of course, as viewers, we know that Akihiro is just being really hard on himself. There was really nothing he could have done to help his brother. In fact, he didn't even know where his brother was or if he was alive, and up until very recently, he himself was subject to a human debris contract. Luckily, Mika and Orga know just what to say to get through to Akihiro. They tell him that Masahiro is a brother of Tekkadan, and they're planning on saving him. Orga once again takes all of the responsibility upon his own shoulders, saying that it's his job as the boss to take care of this. Orga and Naze decide that they don't like being preyed upon by pirates, so they're going to take the fight to the Brewers. They expect that the Brewers will attack them in an area called the Shoals, basically a big debris field left over from the Calamity War that stays clumped together due to semi-functioning Ahab reactors in the wreckage. Laughter and Mika go ahead as scouts in their mobile suits and get drawn into a battle with the Brewers' ship, but instead of following behind, the Isaribi blasts through the debris and flanks them. Tekkadan boarders fight their way through the Brewer's ship, and there's a really rough scene where a group led by Shino gets shot up by some of the kids that are working as pirates. Shino losing his comrades here is a major turning point in his Season 1 arc, and he realizes he can't handle the grief of ordering his friends to go into combat. Akihiro finally comes face to face with his brother, but it isn't the happy reunion that you might expect. Akihiro tells Masahiro that he found a family for the both of them with Tekkadan, but this only makes Masahiro even more angry, saying that he was left to suffer as human debris. Masahiro decides to grapple onto Akihiro and hold him so that Kudal can kill them from behind, but at the last moment he throws his brother away and takes the blow himself, dying in front of Akihiro. Akihiro promises Masahiro that he will be reborn so that they can be together as family, and Mika puts Kudal down in a moment where he realizes that he might actually really like killing people, and that thought doesn't really bother him. For winning the battle, Orga takes one of the Brewers' ships and their mobile suits, and he tells Brooks that if he doesn't like it, he'll turn him into dog food. Along with all the equipment, Orga also decides that they're going to take all of the children that the Brewers currently have under human debris contract, and they tell them that they're free now and are free of being human debris. Naze and Meribit suggest a funeral to help with the grieving process for the Tekkadan members who fell in battle. And just to illustrate how dark their situation is here, none of the kids in Tekkadan know what a funeral is, and it's not really a thing that they do on Mars. They put their fallen comrades inside space pods and then shoot them off where they explode into a bunch of fireworks. Finally, while Orga wanted to sell off the Brewers' mobile suits because they were used to kill Akihiro's brother, Akihiro asks if he can have the Gusion, saying that it will be a way to be together with Masahiro's memory. Kudelia sees Mika's hand is shaking and believes that he's holding strong emotions deep inside, so she tries to console him. Mika then kisses her, and then when she's like, "What the fuck are you doing?" he says he did it because he saw Naze do it and it looked interesting. And then he goes back to eating a space plum, or whatever those are. Ominously, we then get a shot of Kudelia's sponsor, Nobliss Gordon, monologuing about how she will soon die on a nearby colony. Nobliss has been suspicious ever since we saw his sweaty back in that sauna, and now we know for a fact that he intends for Kudelia to be a martyr, because martyrs offer a lot of opportunities for making money. Tekkadan has made it all the way to the Earth sphere, but before they can move on to their final goal, they have a little stopover to make in the Dort colonies. Naze heads to the colony Dort 6, where the Tewaz HQ is located, telling Orga not to mess with Gjallarhorn and everything will be fine. Here in the Earth sphere, Gjallarhorn has a lot more influence and better training than the frontier fleets. Tewaz is influential here, but only as much as a normal company would be, so no mafia tactics will come to their aid if anything goes awry. The Isaribi heads to Dort 2 to deliver a shipment from Tewaz, and Kudelia asks to go to Dort 3 to do some shopping, specifically remarking that the ship smells really bad. So with that, we get our groups for the next small arc, with Orga, Eugene, Shino, and the others heading to finish the delivery job, and Kudelia, Biscuit, Mika, Atra, and Fumiton heading to Dort 3. While Kudelia's group is out shopping, we learn that Biscuit actually grew up in the slums of Dort 2, and he has an older brother named Savarin. His parents died in a car accident when they were young, so Biscuit and his sisters were sent to live with their grandmother on Mars, while Savarin was lucky enough to be adopted by a wealthy family who put him through schooling. Biscuit wonders if his brother still works for one of the companies here in the Dorts, and through a conversation with Atra is convinced to look his brother up and give him a call. Biscuit's able to contact Savarin fairly easily, and at first his brother seems more than happy to talk to him. However, when Biscuit mentions that he's in the Dort colonies for work with Tekkadan, Savarin's mood grows darker. We see that he has a message open on his tablet saying that Union workers at Dort 2 have begun an armed uprising with the help of a group named Tekkadan. But he agrees to meet with Biscuit without saying anything. Back at Dort 2, we see that Orga and the other Tekkadan members are shocked to see the Union workers unloading weapons and armed mobile workers from the Isaribi shipping container. The leader of the labor union, Mr. Navona, explains that the workers have been exploited by the rich owners of the Dort colonies, and that Kudelia and Tekkadan are both symbols and very important to the labor movement. Orga calls Meribit, who knows absolutely nothing about the weapons shipment, and when she checks, it was just supposed to be heavy industrial supplies. As Gallarhorn riot police break in and start arresting people, Orga figures out that everything was all a setup, and he orders Meribit to leave with the ship so that it doesn't get impounded. The Union members don't take Gallarhorn's incursion sitting down, and they start shooting back, and while they're able to drive the soldiers off for a moment, Orga tells the rest of the members of Tekkadan that Gallarhorn's going to be back in force and they need to get the hell out of there. Finally, we get a reveal of the message Fumitan was reading when they arrived at the Dorts. Fumitan has been a double agent the entire time and was supposed to lead Kudelia to a Gallarhorn assassin during the uprising on Dort 2. However, Fumitan has begun questioning her loyalties after spending time with Kudelia and Tekkadan, and accompanied Kudelia to Dort 3 instead. So now our group split up even further, with Biscuit and Atra going to meet Savarin. Savarin mistakenly thinks that Atra is Kudelia, so he makes a call and some thugs show up, taking Biscuit and Atra to an empty warehouse to interrogate them. They don't hold back either, because Atra says that she is Kudelia in order to protect the real Kudelia, so these Gallarhorn agents proceed to beat her for information. They don't really shy away from the fact that this kid is getting her face punched by a grown man either. Orga and his group are taken to a safe house by Mr. Navona and the other Union workers where they can hide for the time being. Orga learns more about the labor union and their fight against their corporate overlords, something that makes both Orga and Kudelia realize that the fight against inequality is not just taking place on Mars. A member of the Union bursts in yelling about Biscuit and Atra being captured and shows Orga that everyone is reporting it as Kudelia being captured. Orga is finally able to make the scheduled call with Mecha and tells him about Atra and Biscuit. The fact that this world doesn't have really great ways to communicate because of the usage of Ahab reactors is really apparent here. Like, Mika's group had to go to a hotel for an appointed time to call Orga, and as someone who grew up in the 90s, that doesn't seem too crazy, but anyone younger must think that it's crazy that the future wouldn't have cell phones. It makes IBO feel pretty unique, though that aspect of the series becomes less apparent after the Dort colony's subplot. He tracks down the alley where Atra and Biscuit were taken and is approached by a strange man from off-screen who asks if he is from Tekkadan. The guy apparently told Mecha where Atra is being held because he steals a truck and drives it through the front of the building, and then disables all the guards on the way to their room. Just in time too, because Atra was still getting the shit beaten out of her for not talking, and Biscuit tells Savarin that Atra isn't Kudelia, but Savarin says it doesn't matter. As long as they have someone that fills Kudelia's role, it will be good enough to stop the unrest that is about to unfold. That is how far Savarin is willing to go to protect the people of the colonies. He's willing to have a completely innocent child executed. Wow, man. Mecha and the others escape out the back where they're picked up by Orga's group in trucks provided by the labor union. They escape the Gallarhorn troops and go back to the hotel to pick up Kudelia, only to find that she isn't there. Unbeknownst to the rest of Tekkadan, the man who approached Mecha in the alley also went into the hotel. This mysterious man has long purple hair and a mask, and he is definitely not McGillis. He tells Kudelia that Nobliss Gordon was the one who facilitated the weapons shipments, using Tekkadan as an unknowing pawn. Fumitan admits the betrayal to Kudelia and then runs off. And this is right after Kudelia tells Fumitan that she doesn't want to betray her or Tekkadan. Damn, I'm sure that stung. As Kudelia chases Fumitan throughout Dort 3, we get a series of flashbacks detailing a time that Fumitan took a young Kudelia out to the Martian city. Even as a child, Kudelia wanted to see how the common people live, so she goes right out into the slums, and Fumitan proceeds to just abandon her there. And the explanation for why Fumitan does this is that she hated how full of hope and optimism the child Kudelia's eyes were full of, which, that's really fucked up, lady. You need psychiatric help. Fumitan has served the Bernstein household since Kudelia was a baby and has always hated her honest eyes. Fumitan had always believed that time would strip that innocence away from Kudelia, but apparently time was not moving fast enough for her, so she decides to abandon a child in a slum to crush her spirit. Pretty fucking fucked up thing to do to a child, Fumitan, you absolute psychopath. Of course, Kudelia picks a really great time to run after Fumitan, as we see the labor union has gotten armed and taken to the streets. Mr. Navona warns all of his men not to fire unless Gallarhorn attacks them first, but, armed mobs marching through the streets towards government buildings rarely end well. Fumitan tries to make it to a spaceport to escape, but finds that everything is locked down due to the civil unrest, and we see outside the colonies the Arion or Hod fleet. The elite fleet of Gallarhorn ships that protect Earth have shown up to put down the rebellion with force. On ground level, Fumitan is accosted by Gallarhorn agents that tell her to get her shit together and lead Kudelia into the chaos of the protest where an assassin will kill her. Kudelia finally meets back up with Fumitan after chasing her to the site of the protest, but is recognized by one of the union workers and dragged into the crowd to meet with Mr. Navona. A bomb that has been planted by undercover agents goes off at the Dort HQ, and that gives Gallarhorn all the reason they need to start shooting. The crowd is shot down by machine gun fire, and in the chaos and smoke, the TV cameras capture Kudelia standing in the midst of it all. A sniper takes a shot at her, only for Fumitan to jump in front of the bullet, saving her life at the cost of Fumitan's own. In the end, Fumitan admits everything to Kudelia and says that she hated her optimism and hope because it reminded Fumitan of herself when she was young, before that hope was ripped away from her by the world. Fumitan dies in the streets while more bombs go off across the colonies, and the TV crew hears that the fighting has also erupted in Dorts 1 and 4. While violence and unrest over the death of Mr. Navona spread to the other colonies, Tekkadan make it to a freight elevator that they believe still might be operational. Labor union members take out armed construction mobile suits and even transports into space, but then they see they're up against the elite Arion or Hod fleet, and even worse than that, all of their weapons have been sabotaged because this entire thing was a setup from the beginning. Tekkadan made it to the elevator, but find that the spaceport is completely locked down due to the unrest, causing Orga to argue with Shino and Eugene about helping the labor union in their fight. Kudelia says she cannot leave and go to Earth without helping these people, saying she won't run from those in need of help again. Luckily for them, the TV news crew sees them fleeing down an alley and approaches. They were told to stop broadcasting the fighting because it's lowering the image of the colonies, and the head of the news team decides that he needs to hear the other side of the story. So the deal is that Kudelia will give an exclusive interview if Orga can use the news team's comm line to contact the Isaribi, where he updates everyone on the situation. Tekkadan heads out into space on the media company's private shuttle thanks to their press credentials, and Mika has the Barbatos delivered right to him. It's worth noting that Dante is the one that delivers the Barbatos, but when he first gets in it and plugs his head into the AV system, it literally almost kills him. That's just how awesome Mika is at using the system and piloting the Gundam. Mika defends the shuttle from Gallarhorn mobile suits until Gaelio and Ein show up and enter the battle. This is also where we get to see Shino's brand new mobile suit, the Ryusei Go, an upgraded and customized Graze built by Tewaz. Gaelio is now piloting a Gundam frame mobile suit called the Gundam Chimeras that his family has kept locked away for decades. The Chimeras does give Gaelio the ability to hold his own against Mikazuki. That is until Akihiro shows up in the newly remade Gundam Gusion Rebake, which has changed the chonky Gusion into a fucking stacked powerhouse with a giant gun. With Mika, Akihiro, and Shino out fighting as hard as they can, Kudelia finally launches an attack of her own. She calls in a favor with Nobliss Gordon, asking him to use his connections to put out a broadcast to all channels using the news crew's camera. And with Nobliss and McMurdo already conspiring to further use Kudelia after she surprisingly survived the assassination attempt, he pretty much immediately complies. Just when our three mobile suit pilots realize they can't stand up against a whole fleet, Kudelia's broadcast begins. She tells everyone that the Dort protests were sabotaged and really takes Gallarhorn to task for making space super shitty. Luckily for everyone on board the Isaribi, Kudelia's gambit works and the regulatory bureau in charge of the fleet decides not to murder her on live TV. Orga meets back up with Naze, and he says that at this point there's really no way to descend to Earth without Gjallarhorn knowing exactly where they are. A ship approaches and makes contact with them, revealing the man on board to be the masked McGillis, who offers to work with Tekkadan as a representative of the Montag Trading Company. They will provide transport to Earth for Kudelia in return for trading rights to the half metal that Kudelia wants to deregulate. Montag, as the masked McGillis calls himself, also reveals the collusion between Nobliss and McMurdo to the group, and this makes Orga realize how Tekkadan is still just a pawn in the grand scheme of things. The events going on around them have been orchestrated by players with monumental power in the government and trade industries, and it's a wonder that Tekkadan has made it this far relatively unscathed. Gaelio contacts a woman from the Outer Earth orbit fleet named Karda Issue. Karda is the daughter of the Issue family, the most powerful members of the Seven Stars, and a commander in the fleet. Besides all that, she was childhood friends with both Gaelio and McGillis, and we get to see when McGillis was adopted, he was an angry little kid who was isolated and took a while to become friendly with his peers. But over time, McGillis, Gaelio, and Karda became great friends, though the way Karda acts towards Gaelio might have you thinking otherwise. Gaelio tells her that Kudelia is heading to Earth with the Isaribi and has to be stopped at all costs, something that Karda is actually pretty pumped to do because her entire character is built around gaining glory for the Outer Earth orbit fleet, and maybe also catching the eye of McGillis as well. Of course, Orga isn't just going to try and smash through the blockade with pure force, instead they come up with another scrappy plan. Orga leaves Eugene, Dante, and Chad in charge of the Isaribi, while the rest of Tekkadan board a Montag trading shuttle. They then have Eugene control two ships at once through his AV system, the Isaribi, and the captured ship that they took from the Brewers. Using the Brewers' ship as a shield, they approach the blockade, and when the fleet blows up the leading ship, we see it's filled with nano-mirror chaff that disrupts pretty much all of the systems on the Earth fleet ships. Eugene then rams a ship named the Gladshammer 1 with the Isaribi's armored nose and grinds it like he's playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4 before bouncing off and breaking through the blockade. Once through the line of defense, Orga and the others launch in the transport, leaving Mika, Akihiro, and Shino to defend it from the fleet's pursuing mobile suits. Mobile suits that include both Gaelio and Ein, who quickly target the shuttle. Ein gets really pissed off during this battle because Shino's Ryusei Go is constructed from Lieutenant Crank's original Greys, leaving Shino with one of the toughest fights he's seen in the series. Luckily, both Ozzy and Laughter show up in mobile suits that have had their armor changed out so that they're unrecognizable as members of the Turbines. Also, luckily for Shino, Ein sees Gaelio struggling with Mikazuki, who's becoming more and more proficient using the Barbados' AV system. Ein goes to help Gaelio, jumping in front of Mika's attack and getting impaled right in the cockpit. Gaelio ejects Ein's cockpit and retreats, and Ein tells him that he took that shot for him because Gaelio is pretty much the only person that treats him like another person, and he also gave him the chance to get revenge for Crank, and even though he didn't do that, it was something that Ein really appreciated. Gaelio is pretty much Ein's only friend throughout the entire series, and that really makes Ein's story all the more tragic. Montag shows up in a mysterious red mobile suit to help Mika fight off members of Karda's elite unit. We get an amazing scene with Mika fighting off one of the soldiers as they enter the atmosphere. As always, the Gundam franchise includes an episode where they have to fight while being pulled into Earth's gravity well, and they always do this because it's always pretty fucking awesome. While Orga and the others are worried that Mika didn't make it back to the shuttle with Barbatos, we get the reveal during the credits that he surfed down through the stratosphere while riding on the Gjallarhorn mobile suit. Now that they're finally on Earth, the inner circle of Tekkadan and Kudelia meet with the leader of Arbrow, Toganosuke Makanai. This is where our hero's journey should end. They've escorted Kudelia to Earth so she can negotiate with Arbrow, but there's one rather large problem. It turns out that Makanai is hiding out on this small island, owned by the Oceanian Federation, because he's actually the former leader of Arbrow, who's been exiled due to a scandal where he was accused of taking bribes. Makanai has a plan, however, and requests that Tekkadan escort him to Edmonton for Arbrow's parliamentary election. His opposition, a woman named Henry Flores, has the direct support of Gjallarhorn, something that could spell doom for her campaign if it came to light. Orga and the other members of Tekkadan are understandably upset at being played like this, and a lot of that could be placed on Kudelia. I mean, she didn't know that Makanai had been deposed, I guess. I think it goes to show that Kudelia has always been idealistic, but dreadfully naive, at least until the events of the Dork colonies. Now Kudelia has a greater understanding of the pieces at play and how the world works, and says that even if Tekkadan bows out, she will go with them to Edmonton alone. To add salt to the wound, Makanai issues a thinly veiled threat to Orga by telling him that he could easily have the Federation rat Tekkadan out to Gjallarhorn. All of this on top of the fact that they have no real way of getting back into orbit, so getting back on board the Isaribi and heading home isn't an option. Orga and Biscuit have a conversation that night that quickly turns into an argument about whether or not they should take the request. Biscuit wants to go back to Mars without taking unnecessary risks, and with Orga being a natural risk taker, the clash results in Biscuit saying that he'll quit Tekkadan and running off. Biscuit's reluctance for Tekkadan to go any further with Kudelia and Makanai partly comes from the fact that he just received a message from Eugene that contains a note left by Sovereign. The note tells Biscuit not to get wrapped up in other people's desires and to do what you believe is best for those around you. In a haunting final shot of Sovereign, we see that this message to Biscuit was actually his suicide note, as he took his own life shortly after the riots in the Dork colonies. Sovereign felt as though he failed everyone as the representative between the company and the labor union, and took the only out that he felt like he had left. An incredibly raw moment in an incredibly raw show. Speaking of incredibly raw moments, Ein was shish kebabbed during that last battle with Mika and is just barely clinging to life. Gaelio feels intense guilt and responsibility over Ein's condition, and he demands that the Gjallarhorn doctors save his life. However, he's been injured so badly that all they can really do is keep him in a comatose state. This is where, through a increasingly manipulative sequence of conversations, McGillis convinces Gaelio to save Ein's life by putting him through the AV surgery. McGillis even takes Gaelio to this secret hangar and shows him a top-of-the-line prototype mobile suit that Gjallarhorn has been building that is fully equipped to take advantage of an AV-equipped pilot. It seems that despite the prejudice against body modification, Gjallarhorn has been researching and perfecting Calamity War AV technology for quite some time. Just another point that McGillis uses to prove Gjallarhorn's hypocrisy and justify his own actions. Down on Earth, Orga gets a call from Makanai saying that the regulatory fleet has demanded Kudelia be handed over, and because the request is coming from Carta Issue herself, it isn't a request that the Federation can ignore. Biscuit and Orga's dispute is put on hold as he comes back to help them plan, though we know that Biscuit quitting Tekkadan was never really in the cards. Kudelia says that she can use her connections to get a ship to pick them up if Tekkadan can hold off Gjallarhorn, leading to an episode where Tekkadan and Gjallarhorn troops go head-to-head both in mobile suits and on foot. I feel like this episode really helps solidify the scale of Tekkadan as an organization, as we get to see plenty of nameless Tekkadan soldiers fighting around the island. While Kudelia and Makanai are spirited away through the island's jungle to evade Gjallarhorn's soldiers, Mika, Shino, and Akihiro are left to deal with Carta's squad of elite mobile suit knights on the airstrip runway. While they are elite, their lack of experience fighting AV-equipped enemies is immediately apparent, as the 3 Tekkadan mobile suits destroy them at an alarming rate. This is also where we get the reveal that the Gusion has 2 hidden arms, and honestly, the rebake version of this suit is just so cool. Tekkadan's soldiers captured the landing ships that Gjallarhorn forces were using to invade the island, and this allows Makanai and Kudelia to make it to their scheduled ship. Shino and Mika are still fighting when Orga hears of the mission's success, but when Karta overhears this, she rushes over to his command vehicle and destroys it. Orga is thrown from the wreckage, but is otherwise fine. However, Biscuit, who is driving the vehicle, is mortally wounded and bleeds out while clutching Orga's hand. Before Karta can finish off Tekkadan's leader, Mika completely snaps, picking up her mobile suit and slamming it back down into the ground. Karta and her men are forced to retreat due to a direct order from Lord Izunario Farid, though the Patriarch tells Karta that she'll get the chance to redeem herself by stopping Tekkadan before they arrive in Edmonton. Tekkadan heads to Anchorage, Alaska in order to hop aboard a train to Edmonton, and while they're on board the ship, we see that Orga has locked himself in his cabin and won't respond to anyone. The loss of Biscuit has left Orga shattered and unable to lead the company. He is inside his own head and feeling responsible for the death of a close friend, and while the other members of Tekkadan seem to be handling it okay, or as okay as kids with trauma can, Orga's self-confidence is pretty much gone. While the adults like Maribit and Yukinojo think it's best to give Orga space and time to grieve, it's Mika who forces Orga to snap back to reality. Mika ignores the advice to give Orga space, directly confronting him in his cabin, saying that they cannot stop moving forward until they found the place that they belong, something that they both decided long ago on the day when Mika first took a life. Orga argues with Mika at first, but he keeps hammering Orga with questions about who he should kill next and how they should move forward. Mika's single-minded drive towards their shared goal that has never faltered once forces Orga to realize that there is no turning back. Biscuit and the others have died on their mission, and the best thing that Orga can do is make their lives count for something. Orga makes a speech on the deck of the ship that rouses the spirits of the kids in Tekkadan and spurs them on to get revenge for their fallen comrades. It's a speech that both Maribit and Yukinojo acknowledge is wrong. Revenge is a dark path to go down, especially when there's a job to do, but they both realize that this is the path that Orga and Tekkadan as a whole have chosen to take. Luckily, they don't really have to wait too long to enact that revenge, as they are confronted by Karta and her soldiers while traveling by train from Anchorage to Edmonton. Orga figures out that Montag is the only one who knew Tekkadan's route to Edmonton, so they must have been double-crossed. Not really a surprise, as McGillis has been engineering the situation behind the scenes for a while. While McGillis tells Karta where Tekkadan is, saying he got the information from an informant and she thinks this is a gift for her to redeem herself. In truth, McGillis assumes Tekkadan will plow through her, removing her piece from the board and advancing McGillis's dream of controlling Gjallarhorn. And plow through her they do, as Mika attacks Karta's formation before they can even get in their cockpits, serves them right for grandstanding and challenging Tekkadan to a duel. Mika pretty much styles on Karta here. I mean, she really has no chance and is mortally wounded before Gailio can show up to grab her body and run. Oh yeah, also all the Tekkadan children here are cheering Mika on because even though stomping a guy into goo with a mech is horrific, it's also awesome, even though Maribit doesn't think so. We now get a small time skip as the next episode opens with Tekkadan having already arrived in Edmonton to find it completely entrenched with Gjallarhorn troops. Makanai says this amount of resistance is really only possible because his opponent, Henry Fleurs, is colluding with Gjallarhorn, something that the economic blocks really aren't supposed to do. They pretty much have to lay siege to the city in order to get across one of the bridges in order to bring Kudelia and Makanai to the Parliament building. Unfortunately, they cannot bring mobile suits within city limits because the mobile suits' Ahab reactors would cause massive disruptions in the city's infrastructure. And if Tekkadan caused this, then Makanai would pretty much be blamed for it and would never win re-election, therefore making their entire mission for naught. So while mobile workers and foot soldiers assault the bridges, Mika, Akihiro, Shino, Ozzy, and Laughter defend their flanks from mobile suits. With the clock until the election ticking, Orga comes up with a plan to use the bulk of his forces in a distracting attack to allow a small group across the dried-up river to escort Makanai and Kudelia to Parliament. Orga gives a speech asking the members of Tekkadan to bet their lives on the coming fight. Meribit tries to stop him once again, but the company is already resolved to give their lives to Orga's cause. So Makanai and Kudelia hop in an armored vehicle with Atra as their driver, and Makanai is like in the back and he's like, can this bitch reach the pedals? Outside Edmonton, Gaelio shows up to fight Mika in order to get revenge for Carta, who died during the escape from her battle with Tekkadan. While the bridge attack works, it requires a large number of Tekkadan soldiers to attack the front line in what's basically a suicidal charge. Even the younger kids like Ride are not spared from the fighting, though at this point they're enthusiastic to fight Gjallarhorn. Eugene, Chad, Dante, and the former Brewers kids show up with armed mobile workers to reinforce the bridge troops, which is good. I was hoping to see them again before the end of the show. Oh, also, the Gundam Chimaris looks really cool while deployed on Earth as well. It has this, like, centaur-like body. The other Tekkadan mobile suit pilots attack the Gjallarhorn pilots while they're having lunch, showing once again that they're willing to fight in an unfair way to gain the upper hand. A huge black mobile suit shows up and immediately takes out Shino, Ozzy, and Laughter. They just can't stand up to its incredible speed and power, which is the final form of a mobile suit equipped with a pilot and a true AV system. Ein has been transformed by this surgery and is now pretty much sealed inside this mobile suit's cockpit. He has no arms and legs anymore, and pretty much nothing to do but fight. Ein overhears on the radio that Makanai and Kudelia have almost reached Parliament Building, so he leaves the battle and rushes off towards the city, landing directly in front of Orga's convoy. Good thing he didn't blow up the bank though, that's where I keep all my stocks. Just as Ein is about to crush Kudelia, Mika shows up to save the day, and we see that Montag showed up to take over his fight with Gaelio. Mika fights the Grey's Ein during the final episode's opening credits, while Orga and the others run off to Parliament, finally delivering Kudelia and Makanai to their destination. Mika fights Ein until he's down to just the katana, and Ein is going absolutely crazy during this whole fight, saying that Tekkadan will pay for their sins. Mika asks Barbados to give him all that he can, removing any remaining limiters on the data stream shared between the pilot and mobile suit. Even the crippling weight of the AV system's full functionality doesn't allow Mika to overpower Ein, and it takes hearing Orga calling out to him for him to power through and make the final blow, impaling the Ein Greys with his katana. A ceasefire signal is shot over the city, and Makanai has been announced as the newly re-elected leader of Arbrow. Apparently, Gjallarhorn bringing a monstrous giant mobile suit into the city limits and disrupting all the power was enough to sway things in Makanai's favor. So, really, it worked out pretty damn well, honestly. Well, he also ceded his platform speech to Kudelia, who told the story of her trip to Earth, exposing Gjallarhorn's corruption. Montag exposes his true identity to Gaelio, explaining how he used Gaelio and Carta as tools to advance his aims towards Gjallarhorn's reform. With Gaelio dead and McGillis marrying his sister, McGillis will have full control of the Bowdoin family, and with Lord Isnario exposed for colluding with Henry Fleurs, McGillis will have control of the Farid family as well. With Carta dead, the Issue family has no heirs, which will allow him to bring them into his faction, allowing McGillis control of the most powerful faction of the Seven Stars of Gjallarhorn. He then tells Gaelio not to worry, as Almeria will be kept happy in honor of his memory. This causes Gaelio to fly into an easily exploitable rage that McGillis uses to finish him off. Tekkadan has been hired on as a military advisor for Arbrow after the trust in Gjallarhorn has fallen to an all-time low, and in the meantime everyone prepares to head home to Mars. We learn that Mika has now lost the use of one of his arms and cannot see well out of one eye due to the strain from the battle. However, he feels fine when connected to the AV system inside Barbatos. Finally, Orga has created a place for them to call home, but he promises to grow Tekkadan into something even bigger. Orga looks towards the future, and for the first time since the start of the series, things are looking fairly bright, and we're left to wonder if Tekkadan's triumphs can continue on into the second season. And that was Mobile Suit Gundam Iron Blooded Orphans Season 1, one of my favorite entries as a whole to the Gundam franchise. IBO is a very grounded and gritty take on an unfortunately believable future, and making people talk about mecha anime in general was an achievement in 2015. Like I said at the beginning of this video, IBO is one of the shows that got me back into anime, and when I decided to start making videos about Gundam, this show was one of the ones I was most excited to cover. But how is Season 2? To be honest, I actually have only seen the second season once before, and while I remember liking it, I also remember that it's a pretty different beast when compared to the first. While IBO Season 1 definitely has its dark moments, Season 2 is honestly pretty depressing most of the time, so I'm interested to see how it holds up and how I'll rank it compared to this one. So until then, I hope y'all have a good day, and we'll be back to cover Mobile Suit Gundam Iron Blooded Orphans Season 2 very soon.